firstly, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining Adoption UK and the FASD Hub Scotland's webinar. It's great that we have so many fantastic experts on your screen tonight. So I will quickly just go through and explain and introduce everybody. So we have Ali Brown from the FASD Hub Scotland, Tracy Allen, FASD Awareness and Foster Carer, Maria Catterick, FASD Network UK, Annie Nugent from NPAE, Catherine Griffiths from FASD Wales, Sandy Butcher from National FASD. So, and I'm Claire Tyler, I'm the Community and Support Manager from Adoption UK. So for anyone who's not joined the webinar so far, we can't see you and we can't hear you, so please do not worry about what's going on in the background, because we have no idea whatsoever. The format of the evening is going to be really informal. We've had some questions that have already come in, so thank you for those of you that have already sent the questions in. Very, very grateful. And if any of you have got questions to go through, please drop them in the chat or the Q&A and we can try and get to those. So the basic format for tonight will be that we're going to start off with what FASD is, talking about then diagnosis, adoption support issues and experiences of FASD. So it kind of runs through the evening, but please feel free to ask any questions. So I believe that Ali's going to start with an overview of FASD, so thank you.
So I'm just going to give you 8 key facts about FASD, and this is not a training session on FASD, it is literally 8 key facts. And we will obviously be going into some of these in a bit more detail this evening. So FASD, first of all, if you don't know, stands for Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder. It is caused, and the only cause is by exposure to alcohol during the pregnancy, and that's any part of the pregnancy. So it's known as prenatal alcohol exposure. It's a lifelong condition and there is unfortunately no cure, although there's many things that can be done to support the individual. So what alcohol does is it interferes with the development of the cells. So before a pregnancy might be detected, and then throughout the pregnancy as that baby is growing. And in my top corner there, just as my slide, you'll see that there's a pretty picture which you probably can't see any detail to, but what that's showing is throughout the pregnancy how alcohol can affect every single part of the developing fetus and then a baby, as it would be termed later in the pregnancy. So alcohol exposure itself has been shown to affect the development of the brain, the central nervous system, which obviously would include things like the hearts and the lungs, and all, as I mentioned, throughout the pregnancy. And it would show those cells, it could show themselves into nearly over 400 individual different things once a child is actually born. So the effects of alcohol can be seen, as I've said, throughout the pregnancy, but then as the individual is developing, and maybe wouldn't be completely identical at moment of birth, but definitely will start developing as the child develops and grows, then you'll start seeing these symptoms. And that could be in an individual through their physical abilities, through behavioural or emotional development. And we would prefer to call these things symptoms. So some of the things you'll see there on the right hand side, attention deficit, hyperactivity, some of those things might look like other conditions, which is quite often why FASD would be thought of as being a hidden disability, and why it is also sometimes misdiagnosed for other things like ADHD or autism or some of the other conditions that you'll be familiar with. I'm not going to go through all of the symptoms tonight because I said this is not a training session about FASD as such. So an individual can be affected by prenatal alcohol exposure, or the individual who's got an FASD diagnosis, and they may need additional support throughout their life. So that would be at work, at home, and particularly during their education years in school. The good news is that with early diagnosis, the right supports and interventions, individuals with FASD can thrive and be very successful in life. The image at the bottom there shows the differences of somebody at the age of 18 and how different aspects of their abilities would demonstrate themselves, so those symptoms. So you'll quite often find somebody at 18 would be able to have the ability to talk, so interact. At the age of a 20-year-old, yet their understanding could be of that language, could be that of a 6-year-old. So you can see as somebody that's going to be quite tricky. But as I said, with all of the right supports in place, that individual still can live independently, they can be successful in life. And anybody that's been following all of the activity over the last month during FASD Awareness Month will have seen lots of different blogs, lots of different posts from individuals speaking about their own FASD. So I said it's a very short, quick whirlwind of what FASD is. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Ali. One of the first questions that's come in is, does gender make a difference in FASD? Anybody like to answer that first?
I would like to say it doesn't make any difference when the baby's born, but as the child develops, I personally feel that girls mask FASD a lot more than boys, so they don't seem to present in the same way. Boys seem to, it's very apparent, where girls seem to have the strategies naturally. They don't even, deliberately put the strategies in place, but they seem to be able to mask it a lot better than boys.
Thank you. Has anyone got anything they'd like to add to that?
I would say that I agree with Tracy. Our son, when he was younger, was somebody who would, in meltdowns, be very aggressive. As he got older, he would go into freezing. So he was either fight or freeze. He didn't really do the flight bit. And he still goes into the freeze bit very easily. And our daughter is a very, very adept masker and has a lot of the same difficulties, but school thinks that she is a model pupil.
Yeah.
They think she's understanding everything, and she's not.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
I could add something. I think it's really important that people understand that FASD affects everyone differently. And that's one of the really hard parts of it, is because there's not any one particular checklist that we could give to say that this is, how somebody might present, because of all the various complications that can occur and the different ways the body's developing and kind of genetic predisposition and what have you. So the kinds of examples and stories that we can give you are all going to be quite limited tonight, because we are limited by those that we know and stories that we hear from others. But the one thing that's for certain is that everybody's affected differently, and the way that it can interact with other conditions, there's up to 400 conditions that can co-occur, more than 400 conditions that can co-occur. So it's a really very complex condition, and the things that we hear all the time, which you alluded to a little bit with one of the slides, is that it's spiky profiles, people who just don't quite fit into the boxes. There might be ADHD that doesn't look like full ADHD, or there might be an autism diagnosis, but it's not a kind of very typical type of autism. So it's a really complicated thing, but arming yourself with information and understanding, if the first thing is to understand whether or not, if you can, whether or not the pregnancy was an alcohol exposed pregnancy. And we know from some limited statistics that have been done in this country, for example, in Peterborough, they showed that up to, it was about 70% of the people who were up for adoption in one study had been alcohol exposed pregnancies. Now that might not be the case everywhere, but it just is something that is important to ask. And sometimes there's information in files that is not necessarily apparent unless you actually ask. So it's just a little bit of information to have should things start to get complicated down the road. You kind of have that understanding that this was an alcohol exposed pregnancy, so maybe it might be FASD.
Thanks, Sandy. And that's led me on really nicely to one of our first questions that's come in. Is there any evidence regarding volume of alcohol intake versus severity of symptoms? Do you have any numbers to share perhaps regarding this, and you've touched on the numbers. It's very difficult, isn't it, to get exact numbers around this?
Yeah.
I haven't got any numbers or stats on any of this, but the two children that I've cared for over 15 years have been exposed to different degrees of alcohol by birth mum, and both of them are at different ends of the spectrum. So it was obviously a different amount of alcohol at a different time. The first pregnancy, mum didn't know that she was pregnant, so she drank quite heavily. The second she did, and she tried to obviously control that a bit better. So both of these children have, one's high functioning and is a little in mainstream and is much more capable, but still with the same difficulties, where the other one that was exposed more heavily has got a lot more difficulties in his specialist schools and presents with the facial features, where the other one doesn't so much. So
okay, thanks Tracy. We'll pick up about the facial features in a moment, so thank you very much. Does anybody else have any information or seen any research at the moment around the amount of alcohol that was drank and how it may affect? I know there's lots going on, especially in America, isn't there?
I think the challenge you've also got is there's so many variables. It isn't just about the alcohol. It's the timing, it's the duration, it's the substance. It's if there's polysubstance, if there's other substances going on at the same time. What is the woman's nutritional health like? It's so many variables. They even look at sort of epigenetic factors, what happened in the generation before or the generation before that. And I think all of those added in, what does dad contribute to the picture as well in terms of vulnerability? There are so many variables that actually I don't think it's ever going to come down to, if you drink this much, this is where it's going to be, because it's such a unique moment and such a unique experience. And that's why we say, if we know one child with FASD, we know one child with FASD. I've had 10 children come through my life and none of them are presenting in the same way. And so I think sometimes we can get, certainly when there's debates going on in social media about, does it really cause harm or not, they're not taking into consideration all those other variables that would happen and can compound the impacts for a baby. So I don't think we're ever going to get to that point with really clear, precise data around specific alcohol use and timing.
No. Yeah. Thank you very much. And I think we all know that alcohol can affect us differently. One day we can have one glass of wine and feel absolutely fine. Another day we can have one glass of wine and feel like we've drunk a bottle. So it's how it can affect us at the same time. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to go, because we've got lots to cover tonight, so I apologise for moving on. We've got lots of questions around diagnosis. So questions, what should we look for other than facial features? There's lots of misconceptions out there, isn't there, especially from a lot of professionals, that if a child doesn't have the facial features, they can't possibly have FASD. Who would like to lead on that question?
I think the first thing that we should say is that facial features of those who would get an FASD diagnosis, only around 10%, and it could actually be less than that, would have those 3 facial features. So that is not an indicator of FASD being present or not being present. And where the features are fixed is quite defined window within the pregnancy, quite early on anyway. So and that doesn't also, whether you have the facial features or not, doesn't indicate how impacted you would be. So you might not have them and be very, you might have them and still be very, or vice versa. So I think just looking for facial features is not the way to go. So things that you would look for would be things like attention deficit. So, struggling to stay on task, struggling to stay focused. Lots of our kids struggle with sleep early in life. Lots of them struggle with things like reflux early in life. Lots of them would there's that kind of adage of failure to thrive. So, you know, not gaining weight, struggling with sleep when they're babies, when they're young toddlers, you know, not developing maybe at the same milestones. But equally, I know children myself and have friends with children who met all those milestones quickly. And it was actually towards the end of primary school when things became more obvious, because they weren't keeping up with their peers in the educational setting. So, and, you know, like Maria said, even the two children just in my household are the ones I know best, and they're completely and utterly different. So one is, you know, very hyper, very on the go all the time, every minute that they're awake. Their kind of impulse control is not there whatsoever. So lots of, you know, throwing stuff and doing random activities, whereas the other one, lots of traits that actually could be more associated with autism, you know, being quite fixed in their thinking, struggling to recognize difference in relationships. So you've really got to look at each individual child, and it isn't a one size fits all, I'm afraid. Like Sandy said, it's quite complicated from that respect.
I think it's really important that everybody understand that at its core, FASD is brain-based. So what we're talking about is that the way the brain has developed has been affected, and therefore cognitive processing and the way that sensory input is processed and things like that, it's how different parts of the brain are talking to each other that can be affected. So obviously when they're little, very little, that's probably a bit less apparent, but as they grow older and they're starting to interact more, learn words, numbers, concepts is what starts to, I remember a time with our son when he was still very little, and I remember very clearly sitting he was on the floor and we were trying to do counting blocks. And it was, you know, one block on top of the other block, 1 + 1 = 2, and put one more and it's 3. And I remember he just wasn't getting it. And I looked up at my husband and I said, something's just not quite right here. And I couldn't, my husband and I have a blog, if anybody's interested in learning kind of the journey that somebody might go through. It's called FASD Learning with Hope. And one of the first posts on it is "We knew." And it's just, you know, we knew from the very beginning. He was adopted at 16 months. We knew something wasn't quite right. But it wasn't until he was 10 that we actually had the information we needed to know to really help him with the diagnosis. And the key bit of that was understanding that this is brain-based, that he the parts of his brain were interacting in the same way, and that was leading to him to become overloaded, that he wasn't processing what we were saying, that there were just general problems in how he was able to understand his world and how he was experiencing his world. And that was kind of mind-boggling for us, because if we had known that years ago, we would have handled things so much differently.
And it's often not until, as you say, more demands are put on and they're having to try and use much more executive functioning, right, that the difference becomes very obvious, isn't it? Because that's one of the questions here: from what age can a child be diagnosed with FASD?
I've spoken to doctor before. I came on this evening, morning, afternoon, totally delayed. He said, obviously, if you've got the facial features, my young man was diagnosed, I think, at 18 months, because he did have the facial features, which was quite early, really, considering that was like 23 years ago as well. And it was really not common. But usually it's about, am I quite right, Sandra, with Raj's clinic, is it 5-6 years that they usually do the diagnosis?
That's the national clinic won't see people until they're 6 usually.
That's it, 6, yeah, because they need to be able to take in the diagnostic multidisciplinary, assessment. So I think you need to be able to engage, don't you? And obviously somebody under that age maybe might not be able to do it in the way that's required.
And it's often not until kids are transitioning into secondary school that some of it becomes really apparent, and they might not have had a diagnosis prior to that. But if you think about all the changes that start to happen and how complicated schoolwork gets and the school day becomes and social situations become really overwhelming, and so a lot of times kids with FASD, even if they're diagnosed and not properly supported in the schools, it can become a really challenging time.
Sandy, we just got a question that's coming. Sorry, Marie.
I was just going to say, I've certainly seen lots of the very little ones diagnosed with the full features and, you know, really clear history. And that tends to end up being like a 2-stage diagnosis, that sort of recognition diagnosis where that's confirmed, but then going out sort of age 5, 6, 7 to go get that full clinical understanding of what's impacted. We always describe it not just as a brain, but a body condition, brain and body together, because there are so many physical impacts that can be there. And we'll often, sometimes people say, isn't 6 too late to get that diagnosis? Some of the old research used to say a diagnosis before age 6 was really beneficial. And what you can actually think about of it is look at what could already be assessed. What can we already be working on while we're waiting for that signing off of the official FASD diagnosis? We can have sensory work done. We can look at some of the other characteristics and you know, body or behavioural impacts and start working with that. So it's not that we sort of wait and park it. We get on with things that we can get on with whilst waiting for that official sign off as well.
Yeah, thank you. Sandy, we've got a question that's come in for you. When you said earlier that if you knew earlier what you know now, you might have done things differently. Could you give one or two examples of what you may have done differently?
Yeah, well, a lot of it has to do with just how we parented and the expectations that we had as parents. So the first thing I would say is if anybody has a child that they're caring for who they think might have FASD, there's absolutely nothing that would stop you from being able to just start using some of the FASD-informed parenting strategies as soon as you can, because even if it's not FASD, it's likely that some of those strategies are going to help anyway. I wish somebody had said that to me, because the diagnosis process took, once it was suspected, until the actual diagnosis, it was something like 1.5 years. And if we had just started using those parenting strategies at the beginning of that process rather than at the end, things would have been different. So it's things like bedtimes, for example. We had battles for years over bedtime, and he just couldn't settle. And as he's become older and he's become more able to explain what he needs, I mean, actually right now it's 8:30 and we've had to just go in and before we came on here, he was in there with his music blasting and he's 16, in there with his music blasting and he's rocking to music, and he does that every night. So prior to that, when he was little, we used to put on the lullabies, we'd have a nice, gentle light on in the room, and the things that we thought that he needed at bedtime were exactly opposite of what he needs. He needs to have pitch black, he needs to control his music. It's not the music I would have given him, and it's pounding and it's rocking, but he needs that to focus himself and to clear his head so that then he's prepared better for falling asleep. Now that's just our son. That's against pretty much a lot of the different kinds of advice you would get out there about sleeping. I'm not suggesting that people all of a sudden do this. It's just that he has been showing us every step of the way what he needs. And we hit a point where I said to my husband that we were saying no to him like 100 times a day. We were invalidating the way he was experiencing the world. And we stopped and we just backed way back. We slowed everything down. We stopped trying to go to every kind of after school club that we could. We stopped thinking that, he just needs to get used to being in crowded stores. We simplified life. We slowed down. We listened to what he was telling us and what he was showing us. If he didn't want to go out somewhere, and now he knows how to say, well, my brain can't handle that. And when he says that, we stop. We just don't do it. Where before we would have pushed through and we had major meltdowns in cars, and it was just, so, and again, it's different for everybody, but I think the most important thing is if it's suspected, to do some reading about different parenting strategies. There's some on all of our websites. National FASD just did a new website update if people want to look there. But the information's out there. You don't need to have that diagnosis on the paper before you can start understanding what this young person's needs might be and seeing things from their perspective a bit more.
Thanks, Sandy. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that information. That was really useful. While we're talking about diagnosis, we've got participants here from all over the UK. And I think it'd be really great if we could just give a very kind of couple of sentences over how diagnosis in your part of the UK tends to work, to give people an idea. Can we start, Ali, in Scotland? Is that all right?
Mm-hmm.
Putting you on the spot.
Sure. So obviously Scotland's the only part of the UK that currently has a diagnostic pathway in our SIGN guidelines. And having said that, it's still very postcode lottery, dependent on the doctor that you get in front of you, their knowledge of FASD. But fundamentally, it would be that you would need, as Sandy said, a history of alcohol exposure. They would cover things like genetics, they would look at speech and language, look at OT. There would be a clinical psychologist probably involved to do neurodevelopmental or cognitive assessments. And the paediatrician in Scotland would be the person that would kind of hold all that together and coordinate, and they would be the one that would actually give the diagnosis.
Thank you very much for that. Annie, can I ask you how it works across an island?
Yeah, I think, well, in Ireland, we don't have a diagnostic pathway, and it's very, very difficult to get a diagnosis. I think the same goes for Northern Ireland. There are a few of our members whose children have been diagnosed, but it's a constant battle trying to identify people here that stay here, because quite a few emigrate. Quite a few of the doctors that that we know have diagnosed have then moved on and left the country. So it's a battle. We're hoping that now that Scotland's bedding in and England and Nice are following that pathway, that Northern Ireland will hopefully be. But yeah, it's very difficult.
Thank you very much. Catherine, can I ask you about Wales?
I think I would say that Wales is somewhat similar to Northern Ireland. Knowledge of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is generally very patchy and very poor, so that you may be lucky, go to your GP, you'd get sent to the paediatrician. The paediatrician would send you to genetics for a blood test to rule out other genetic disorders that have some of the similar kind of symptoms. And then what happened with us, both of our children do not have fetal alcohol syndrome. They don't have the facial features in full. The geneticists looked at them, did not measure anything, said they don't have fetal alcohol syndrome. It's fine, just go. And this was quite a long time ago, the only way we could get a diagnosis, we couldn't get anywhere in Wales then. So we paid privately to go to the National FASD clinic in Surrey with Dr. Mukherjee. Now there are some paediatricians in some parts of Wales who have been worked on by people who have children with FASD who know more. But I did a Freedom of Information request on the diagnostic pathway and support pathway in Wales in June of last year. And we have 7 health boards in Wales. It's differently organised to England. And only 1 health board was following the Scottish SIGN guidelines. And 4 of the health boards said there wasn't any national pathway for FASD that they knew of. And 2 of the health boards said they would only diagnose fetal alcohol syndrome. And what was this FASD all about? So I think it just depends on the luck of the draw. It's supposed to be that once you've had the genetics ruling out the genetic conditions, that you then should go through a neurodevelopmental assessment with the psychologist, occupational therapist, speech and language therapist, similarly to what you would do for autism. But there's such a long waiting list in our part of Wales for getting a assessment for autism. our pediatrician says they don't know how they would cope if they did it for FASD as well. So they need, I think, to get centres in each health board to diagnose neurodiversity in all its breadth. So include FASD, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, anxiety, depression, all those sort of things in one place. At the moment, there aren't any areas of expertise in each health board.
Thanks, Catherine. Thank you. It's disappointing to hear there's only 1 out of 7, isn't it?
Yeah.
But we have hopes of improvement.
We do.
Maria, can I ask you about England?
Well, my focus has really been on the northern areas of England.
And if I get Sandy to talk maybe about the National Centre in Surrey, is that okay?
Sorry?
And then if Sandy talks about the National Centre in Surrey afterwards, is that okay?
Yeah, so what we found is through family power, we've certainly unearthed paediatricians and connected with CAMS teams, neurodisability pathways, commissioners, and we have what we would describe almost virtual clinics. So the paediatrician would take the lead, often has been described, you rule out genetics, paediatrician takes the lead. And then our families either get their assessments from the educational psychologist via school and their education, health and care plan, or they get the access to CAMS because they're often maybe a looked after child or have come through onto an ADHD or an ASD or a multi-agency assessment panel. And we just gather up the assessments from varieties of people, all that go back to the paediatrician, and it's the paediatrician who signs it off. Still a postcode lottery, but what we endeavoured to do a number of years ago is find at least one paed in each locality, so families were then eligible to try and go and get their diagnosis. And we've had some, well, most of my families that I connect with, we've got about 1,000-ish. Most are actually diagnosed. We haven't got that many who are undiagnosed. Big issues is often around, is the data there of prenatal alcohol exposure and can we access that? We will have families who will never get their diagnosis. And so we just say, live as though they have FASD. If you can get the secondary diagnoses, such as autism, ADHD, attachment, or any of the other sensory processing issues, get those and still work through all of their needs, and we can still get them to where they need to be successfully, whether their diagnosis is in place or not.
Lovely, thank you. Thanks, Andy. Can you explain about Surrey?
I can, yeah. And if I could just say, I mean, the work that Maria's done in the Northeast is hope for the rest of the country. But just as a kind of counterpoint to that, where we are in East Harts, there is nobody who is commissioned to be able to diagnose FASD. So in our local support group that my husband and I started here, it's a real battle just to get seen for diagnosis. And generally, you have to be referred for ADHD. And if you're then happen to be in the pediatrician's office, and she suspects FASD, then she can do what needs to be done for a diagnosis. But it's you know, it is so patchy in different parts of the country, and I think that needs to be acknowledged. I also wanted to say one other comment about the timing involved with it. A lot of times people are told that they have to go to genetics first to rule out that, but actually a pediatrician, and then because then, you know, somebody would refer you, then it takes you however many, very many long months to see a geneticist, and then that gets ruled out. Well, a pediatrician can actually order that initial array test to see the blood test. And if it comes back positive, then they can refer you to a geneticist. So that's one way to save a bit of time in the process. The National FASD Clinic is set up to handle the more complex cases that are out there. It's generally people are but because there's places like East Harts where you can't get diagnosis, people are sometimes able to get a referral to go there. We did. After we had been sent to Great Ormond Street that didn't have the capacity to do a proper diagnosis for FASD. In our case, we know others who have been diagnosed there, but the National Clinic is meant to be the place where you can go for more complex cases. They can also advise, so if there's somebody's in an area and the local team thinks that they don't really have enough information or no confidence in how to do a diagnosis, those practitioners can contact the national clinic for advice. And again, that just saves time rather than waiting. It's an immensely long waiting list. It's an expensive thing. Some people do go privately. There's also the Center for FASD in Suffolk that has opened up now. They've been able to help some people. They've also helped people who are, a lot of times with adoption, it teeters on that edge. Is it trauma? Is it attachment? What is going on here? And the Cassie Jackson at the Center for FASD has been developing a kind of specialty in working with people who are trying to sort through that, and has been able to help people get access to diagnosis and her assessments via the Adoption Support Fund. The other thing I think people should be aware of is that there is this process going on right now that's been mentioned a little bit, I think, but NICE here in England is coming up with what's called a quality standard on FASD. They're taking the work that's been done in Scotland and kind of going the next step and identifying areas where there needs to be improvement in the quality of services about FASD. And it's a wide-ranging thing that covers everything from the initial appointment at the moment, if it stays this way, through the finalization of it. But it includes everything with how women are given access to information about alcohol and pregnancy in their antenatal appointments, to how, and this is an important part of it that was, maybe some of you have seen it debated in the media this week, about how if it has been an alcohol-exposed pregnancy, that would be noted in the pregnant woman's notes and also the transferred to the child's notes. If that stays in, that is a huge step forward, because it then provides that key bit of information that might be needed years later to have a diagnosis. At the moment, that doesn't really happen very often. It's quite challenging to get that bit approved. And then the other parts of this quality standard are that there would be people who there's concerns about would be put forward for diagnosis. And if you had a diagnosis, everybody with the diagnosis would get a neurodevelopmental assessment, and that there'd be a management plan in place for that person, young person. None of it deals with adults, but just so the quality standard, once it comes in, it's not going to be a magic thing. Just like in Scotland, you're saying, you've got the pathway, but it's not magic. But what it allows you then to do is to use that to push local clinical commissioning groups to, make these changes and improve. And it also, the main thing that I think it'll do, too many people now, the number of times you hear something like, oh, full FAS, meaning that's the worst you can possibly have is fetal alcohol syndrome, which is, people were saying before, all that means is that there's facial features, but somebody might not have those facial features, but still be more cognitively affected than somebody with facial features. So this quality standard is all about FASD. It's changing the diagnostic terms so that it will be FASD with sentinel facial features and FASD without sentinel facial features. Why they need that facial feature thing in there, whatever. There's still but it's going to be FASD now. So there's changes coming. It's still frustrating, but there'll be more tools. All of these things are tools for people if they're pushing for a diagnosis or pushing for information, or once the system gets in place, hopefully there'll be a lot more people showing the children's records will be clear about whether or not it was an alcohol-exposed pregnancy, and things can move forward.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for giving how it works across the UK. We're going to move on now to adoption support issues, and tonight's for prospective adopters. So one of the key questions that's come up is, what should we be asking during linking and matching? We have got lots of questions, so I'm going to have to ask you to keep your answers as short and concise as possible. Anybody want to go first on what they think? A prospective adopter, Catherine.
Ask about alcohol use in pregnancy, get it written down, and all other things like drug use and amount of alcohol use if possible, and when, because in our experience, our son and daughter have the same birth mother. For our son, we had no nothing written down except possibly the word alcohol somewhere deeply hidden. And we had to find somebody who knew the birth mother and was willing to say that she saw her in the pub every night while she was pregnant with our son. And that was taken as being evidence. With our daughter, it just so happened that the social worker was seeing the mother about our son when she was pregnant with our daughter. And so she asked her, and that was put in her medical record that we saw, and that helped a lot.
Absolutely. And I think one of the questions to be asking the social worker is, how did birth mum spend her leisure time? What did she do with herself all day? Because a lot of them are quite reluctant to say about alcohol, where they say, well, actually, she spent a lot of time socialising in the pub. So that can kind of then lead on to questions.
I think a lot of people often think that it has to be the birth mother kind of saying that she drank in pregnancy, and while that's obviously very helpful, I'm reading now from the SIGN guidelines on what qualifies as proof. So it's reliable clinical observation, self-report or reports by a reliable source. So that could be somebody close to the birth mother. Medical records documenting positive blood alcohol concentrations or alcohol treatment or other social, legal, or medical problems related to drinking during the pregnancy. So if somebody's having difficulty finding that proof that it was an alcohol-exposed pregnancy, they might read that list off to social workers who might be reviewing files, or to, because a lot of times maybe even the professionals around the family might not understand the range of things that can be accepted as evidence of an alcohol-exposed pregnancy.
Thanks, Sandy. That's really useful to know. Thank you. Ali, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to agree. I was just speaking to a doctor yesterday about that very thing, and they'd been asking social work, and social work were like, oh, well, I think there's still maybe a little bit of a reluctancy for social workers to put their name against saying that a mother did drink alcohol. I think it's helpful to point out the chief medical officer's advice maybe in those situations, that they're not going against something that's not already out there, but certainly looking in things like the LAC medicals as well when a child first comes into care, and then they should have one every 6 months. Looking for things like if there has been any incidents of domestic violence and maybe they were taken to hospital and presented there, it would be recorded quite clearly if they were under the influence of alcohol. And excuse me, being able to ask if you're kind of in the situation where you maybe find yourself after a child has been placed with you and then you realizing, so it was before matching, which plenty of us have been in that situation, then you could ask for things like subject access requests as well. So you could actually be asking social work to go through previous files and be really specific about what it is you're asking them to look for, not just
the more information the more information you can get pre-adoption order, the better it is, because it's very hard post-adoption order to get that. Sorry, Tracy, you were going to
Sorry, can I mean, I've not adopted, but I would be asking, and I sort of had a few of my questions answered when I fostered long term, but I would be asking if mum and dad have got any diagnosis themselves or any mental health issues. I'd definitely be asking about their lifestyle choices and trauma to the children, and also if the children are coming to you, not as young babies and they're a little bit older, then I would definitely be asking how they're functioning and achieving, and also if they've got any behavioural difficulties.
Thank you very much for that. Great questions. Thanks, Tracy. We've got a question here, and what support is available for adopters with a child with FASD?
All of the organisations here tonight, obviously, are there to support adopters and everybody else who's got a child with FASD. You should be able to gain support as an adoptive family through either your local authority or your placing agency if you've gone with an independent agency. It's then going to very much depend, unfortunately, on what part of the country you live as to whether there is a local support group, as Sandy's described, and I know Maria has lots happening in the northeast. And you kind of, I would suggest contact whatever of the organisations here that represent the geographical area that you live in as a first off, and they will then be able to helpfully signpost you.
Usually we've got Zoom support groups, and obviously not at the moment, but face-to-face support groups. So there is, the support out there, but it's just whether it's in your area or whether you want to travel as well.
Yeah. Catherine, sorry, you were going to say?
I have recently been talking to Anne Bell, who is the director of Adoption UK in Wales, and what an eye opener or an ear opener it was, because she told me lots of things I didn't know before, which is in Wales there's a national adoption service and regional adoption agencies. I have been doing some Zoom training with them for Mid and West Wales adoption. So whichever your area is, you can get all sorts of training and support from that. Adoption UK in all parts of the UK, I think, have, well, it's much better in Scotland, but in other parts, there's a Wales helpline, which you can phone, and they also do this Tessa UK thing, which I think is also in Northern Ireland. Well, it came from Northern Ireland. It's also in Scotland and in England, parts of
coming to England soon.
And Tessa is therapeutic education and support services in adoption, and includes peer support, access to clinical psychologists for assessment and support, all sorts of therapy and counselling, and signposting to provision for more specific things like FASD Cymru in Wales and other FASD support locally and nationally.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And Sandy, I know, runs support groups for the children as well.
That's in our local, the East Hearts group. It started off because we were meeting on Saturdays, and the kids needed somewhere to go, and it turned out that it really helped the young people. They started calling it the FASD Club, children who didn't want to go out normally, couldn't wait to come. And then we started doing much more kind of understanding that this was helping them better understand themselves and their own condition, which is, I think, is something that is incredibly important. The t-shirt I'm wearing right now with hashtag walk along with me, we've released a song just last week for FASD Day that if people are interested in hearing, these are the words from, we included, we got input from more than 70 people with FASD, and this is them explaining what it's like for them, what they want people to know about living with FASD. So, we can talk all we want to about it here, but we're not living it. And it's really important to listen to the people who have the condition. And also, I think it's important to say, I know this isn't really the forum for it, but also to birth mothers. Our organizations are about more than just, there's all different kinds of shapes of families, and birth mothers are a very important part of our communities. And there's lots of reasons why women might drink during pregnancy, and it's kind of one of those things that we have to all approach this with a stigma-free and blame-free kind of dialogue for the whole community to grow. But yeah, the children and young people, and I think what National FASD has also been doing summer programs called Brain-Based. The FASD.me website, which is where the song is, it's coming out in October. There's going to be a whole range of things to help young people with FASD understand and own their diagnoses. Then this is part of a partnership project with the Seashell Trust that's funded by the Department of Health. So there's some things starting to slowly change in the community. And what got us through it all was understanding the condition, looking to see what adults with FASD were doing, to see there's some amazing things out there that are happening, getting that longer term perspective on things, and it's not, I feel a little bit like, because of the nature of what we're doing, we're going through this very quickly and talking in a very kind of matter-of-fact way about things that are actually quite intense emotionally and personally. And when you're trying to think about what kind of future you want, and what kind of challenges you may or may not be able to cope with given whatever family situations there are. My husband is an adoptee himself, and he's written pieces, again, it's on the blog, about what it, when people ask him, if you knew that your child had FASD, would you have adopted? And in our case, the answer is absolutely. We had already come to terms. I was an older mother. I've got an older biological child. We'd already decided with that pregnancy that we weren't doing the tests, even though they told us there's a very high proportion of likelihood that we might have had a biological child who would have had some challenges. We had gone through that as a couple, already deciding that we would be welcoming of a child with additional needs in our family, and that we could support that. So, you really have to ask yourselves those sorts of hard questions. They're not easy questions, and there's no one right or wrong answer. But if you decide that you might be able to do that, and if you've gone and you've learned everything that you can learn about FASD, and you can talk with any of the groups out here, you can meet with people, maybe learn about it, and then if you do decide to go into it, it can be a fantastic life. I mean, we are so much better as a family because there's 4 of us, each with different strengths, and I would do it all again in a second. I just wish that all those times that I held this kid who wasn't consolable and who was having so many challenges that I didn't understand, I just wish I knew sooner how to better support him. And who knows what the future's bringing, but wow, has he brought sunshine into our world.
Thank you, Sandy. And that leads me very nicely on to the next section, really, and that's about experience of FASD. So thank you for talking with such honesty. I'm going to put you all on the spot now and ask you for what you think is maybe a top tip, something that you wish you'd have known, or the one piece of advice you would pass over to somebody, that key, whether it could be school, it could be for a new parent. So anybody want to be brave and put their hand up first for that? Annie, thank you.
I think it can be challenging, if you're looking at, say, perhaps pursuing speech and language or OT, or trying to establish where you're at. So for me, when I felt kind of overwhelmed, when I was first a foster carer originally, and then I went on to adopt. So for me, I kind of set myself a 6 months time frame, and I just used to think, like, what can I achieve in this 6 months? And slowly we'd work through, and then we'd get to that 6 months, and before you know it, you can build on those blocks, and then you look back and you've done so much in the years that have passed. Yeah. But in order to get there and don't feel overwhelmed with it, it's just to set those small 6 month blocks. What can you achieve in that time frame?
Thank you, Annie.
I've got this weird background. My hand does strange things on it. I would just to say quickly, I think if we had understood, we might have explored moving to a specialist school sooner. Not everybody with FASD has a learning disability, which is usually defined as an IQ less than 70. But I think that we were so focused on inclusion, and if we had perhaps moved him to a specialist school sooner, he moved in year 8, and it made life so much easier. So I would have been more creative about thinking about different types of provision.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Sandy. Maria.
I think one of the things that's been helpful has been to think broadly. You were talking even before about what support services are out there, and we've gone straight to, fetal alcohol and adoption sort of support services. Think creatively. There's all the sports groups, there's the disability groups, there's the community activities. There's so many other ways to build that support network by thinking creatively. And sometimes it's been that creative exploration that's released our children's talents. We have talented children. Fetal alcohol on one side is children with disabilities. Flip the coin and we've got outstanding giftedness. We've got athletes, we've got musicians, we've got artists, we've got writers, we've got academics, actually.
Hold on to that, because I'm going to ask you for a positive to round off.
Yeah, so
hold
for
on
me,
to that.
It was looking at what can I do creatively to bring support around me, but then how do I release that sort of creative joy and giftedness that we've got as a family? And I think that was something that I learned along the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I just say, from my personal view of looking after 2 children and having 3 birth children as well, I totally changed my parenting. I've totally changed my world, and it has had an amazing effect not only on my life, my 3 all of the children in, you know, our family. It's completely changed just everything about it. I would never ever change any of it. I would do it all again, and it has been turbulent at times, and we've had some really lows and some amazing highs, but the reality for me is I had to change my mindset. I thought out of the box, but then I had to think out of that box again. And then when I actually did, and the help from Susan from Fasd originally over the phone mentoring me many years ago, just got me through it. And once I sort of accepted that this wasn't going to be a perfect road, and on the flip side of that, it wasn't a perfect road with my other children either. So all I had to do was just have the courage, and I was a little bit of a novice of being a parent because I'd never done it before for anybody. Just hold the hand and just walk with them, and you know, whatever those hurdles are, as you're leading the way for any child. It doesn't matter who they are, what disability, but as parents, that's what your job is. You know, you don't just take a child on and think, oh, you know, it's a bit rocky, we're gonna, you know, we just do it, don't we? And I think just having the guts and you know, being an advocate and challenging everybody, and the main thing is educating yourself. As soon as you've got that education and you're linking with other people that have got that experience and you're learning from them, that just is amazing. So I you know, just really feel just
that's great.
carry on and do it.
Thanks, Tracy. Thank you. Catherine?
I would follow on from what Tracy has said and say, follow your instincts. When our son joined our family at 3.5, we had no idea how to parent. Everybody was there ready to give us advice. None of it worked. And we found that out on the first day that he came to us. And we just thought, we can tell this isn't going to work. This child is not going to thrive the way that we were brought up.
Yeah.
And we followed what he wanted us to do. So we were the mad family who would be blowing bubbles outside in the dark with the outside lights and very beautiful colors. I recommend that. Trampoline for an hour in the dark with the torch before bed. Very calming, opposite of what you'd think. Things like gymnastics off the furniture might drive you mad. Very calming for our daughter. When our son went completely mad and had meltdowns because he was just too tired after school, pick him up, march him down the road. 5 minutes down the road from us is the sea. He would by the bottom of the road be talking to me again instead of kicking me, hitting me and punching me. And by the time he got to the beach, he would be running around finding stones, throwing them into the sea, saying to infinity and beyond, you know, getting some sort of rhythmical motion like the trampolining or the marching down the road would help him click out of whatever it was.
Thanks for sharing that, Catherine. And Ali?
I think that... You carry on. No, you carry on.
I think I was going to come and say that, remember, you are the expert about your child. So as much as you'll meet all of these people along the road who maybe have got lots of initials behind their names or before their names or whatever, you will always be the expert about your child. And I completely agree with everyone else. You change how you parent, it changes who you are as an individual. You find buttons in you that you never thought existed that get pushed. You know, you go to places in your own head that you'd never dreamed you would ever have thoughts that you have. But when all of those things happen, that to know that that is completely normal as well. I think finding a community, find your tribe, whoever that is. You know, whether that's a group of other adoptive parents, whether it's a group of parents with kids with other neurodevelopmental difficulties, you know, whatever fits for you, but find people who get it. and surround yourself with them and make them your support network. And I know we're speaking to a group of prospective adopters, and not to be too, you know, downhearted, but unfortunately the list of people you're about to put on your map of support, I can probably guarantee within the first year, and everybody's going to laugh,
Yeah.
they will not be your support network.
No, absolutely.
Parents and they'll all agree. So, you know, just be prepared for the fact that it is kind of fiction as you're writing it now, but you will find a group of people that will become your friends.
Thank you. I'm really conscious that we're hitting 9 o'clock, but what I'd like to do again is put the panel on the spot and ask you just to think about one real positive, because I'd like to finish this evening with a positive about FAS. So as host, I'm going to start and just say I'm very proud that my 16-year-old has passed every single one of his GCSEs with flying colours in mainstream. So that's my proud moment, and he has FAS diagnosis. So thank you. So who would like to go next? But I said with a positive. Tracy, should we go to you?
I'm just so proud of my Stephen being an ambassador and being such a kind, caring boy who's 23 now, that is really enjoying life. He's been very delayed in, you know, his milestones, but he's really catching up now and he's really enjoying it. And his sister, who's an amazing dancer, they're so practical in their abilities. I mean, she smashed, you know, the Michigan theatre, and, you know, was accepted into a private dance school. So, you know, for those sort of achievements for people that maybe academically weren't able to, and, you know, when I was in that journey at the very beginning, they asked me and said, you know, this child might not be the brightest button, and I thought, well, I'm not that shiny sometimes, so it doesn't really matter. So to see them shine in a practical way, and that's my advice, is to push them down that way if that's what they want and that's where their abilities are, because once you push them in the right direction, they are amazing. They glow.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tracy. Catherine.
Our son has been through a lot and he is incredibly resilient. He comes back and he never gives up. And he's also very good at recognizing music from about 2 bars and recognizing actors in totally different films, and people, if he sees them on the street, he knows where he's seen them from. Our daughter is the most determined 13-year-old you will ever find, and she is very organized, and she wants to do everything that her friends can do, and she's very artistic and excellent. If you want a house or a room redesigned, she is your person.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Catherine. Annie.
I just want to celebrate the ongoing journey, because like we came from quite a difficult place as well, but we're still in education, so kind of all the goals, you know, like the building blocks, the foundations, and just continuing to grow. That's what I want to celebrate. I think humour and the love, you know, we're in a really good place, and it's fab.
Thanks, Annie. Thank you for that. Ali.
So I would say I'd celebrate my young guy, and he is still young, that actually his determination in life, you know, he gets up every day, and he's virtually every day got a smile on his face. I don't think he gets up grumpy. He can be grumpy, but he doesn't get up grumpy. And the other thing that he always continually amazes me with is his actual love of animals, and almost sort of infinite, I don't know, just this relationship that he strikes up with any creature that he comes across. And my little girl, she just is so happy. So, you know, we always laugh about that she lives in this fluffy pink world, and she does a lot of the time, but her pink world is a caring world. You know, she wants to make friends, she likes baking cakes, she's just learning to surf, which is honestly awesome to watch. So, you know, they're just, I think, as Catherine said, really quite resilient kids considering everything they've been through.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that, Ali. Maria.
I've had so many different children, and just collectively it's the joy and it's the creativity and it's the fun and it's the life, and what they do to me, even just to challenge me to be better, to learn more, to do more, to explore more, to be more creative. I've loved that. One of my oldest girls is an amazing horsewoman, absolutely amazing horsewoman, and has successfully gone through college when she came out with no qualifications in school, but she's successfully passed all of her college, and she's now putting even her PIP money. She's determined she's not going to give up on learning maths and English, so she's spending her own PIP money on a specialist tutor. She doesn't have to do it anymore, but she wants to. And just the determination of our children, well, certainly my children that I've witnessed, I can't fault. It's amazing life.
Thank you. Thanks, Maria. And last but not least, Sandy.
Yeah, no, I just, our son tries harder than anybody that I know. And he has this reset button that just constantly inspires me to be better, to let go of moments that, you know, rather than let the frustration build, but just to start fresh in a new moment. And that he can, even after some, you know, he's had some really hard days, but that he is able to stay positive or to restart. And he's taught himself electronic music and how to create videos, and he's got people listening to his music all over the world. I mean, it's just awesome. I mean, really, truly awesome capabilities that I learn every day from him.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much for sharing. I'd like to thank the panel for your honesty, for your humour, for sharing so many of your stories, because they're very personal, and passing that information over. I'd also like to say a huge thank you for everyone who's joined us tonight. I apologise that we never got through all the questions. We could have done at least another hour to get through all the questions. So if you did ask a question, we didn't get that, I do apologise. But please feel free to email in. So thank you, and I hope everyone's enjoyed this evening. Thank you all so much for joining us and for sharing your expertise. And thank you so much to everyone who's joined in tonight and been so interactive. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
very
you.
much.